Tonight, we turn our attention towards something most of us carry quietly, often without a name for it. What does it actually mean to care for a mind in a world that rarely slows down enough to ask? Science has been gathering answers for years, and those answers are gentler, more forgiving, and more hopeful than most people have been led to believe. This is a space where that science is safe to land. Welcome to Psychology for Sleep. Wherever you are right now, perhaps with the lights already low, your body slowly unclenching from the day, allow yourself this particular kind of stillness. We'll move through 100 psychology facts about mental health awareness, from the neuroscience of how the brain responds to kindness, to the quiet dignity of simply being a human who sometimes struggles, to the tender science of why rest is not a luxury for the mind. It is the mechanism by which the mind repairs itself. This kind of content reaches people in the moments they need it most, late at night, when the world has gone quiet and a tired mind is finally ready to be still. A gentle like, a quiet subscribe, or sharing this with someone you care about helps other exhausted minds find their way here too. It takes only a moment, and it means everything to the people still searching. You already know what it feels like to need this. Someone else is feeling exactly that way tonight. Let yourself settle all the way in now. Feel your jaw soften. Let your shoulders drop. There is nothing to perform here, nothing to manage, nothing to hold together. You can let the heaviness behind your eyes begin to ease. The way a room feels after the last guest has gone. Still, unheld, and finally, only yours. Nothing is required of you tonight except this: to breathe and to let yourself be cared for. Close your eyes and breathe deeply. You're resting in the room that finally asks nothing of you. Let your mind soften with it. And now we begin. Mental health is not a destination. It is a process. Ongoing, non-linear, and deeply personal. For most of human history, the mind was treated as something to be controlled, disciplined, or overcome. Modern neuroscience tells a different story entirely. The brain is not a fixed machine running on permanent settings. It is a living, adaptive organ, continuously responding to experience, relationship, rest, and attention. Understanding mental health begins with this single shift, from thinking of the mind as something that either works or breaks, to understanding it as something that is always, in some way, in motion. That motion can be tended. That is what awareness makes possible. Approximately 1 in every 2 people will experience a diagnosable mental health condition at some point during their lifetime. This is not a fringe statistic from a small study. It reflects data gathered across decades, from research spanning dozens of countries. What this means, quietly and without alarm, is that the experience of mental struggle is not an exception to ordinary human life. It is woven through it. The stigma that makes people feel alone in their difficulty is, in a very real sense, built on a misconception. Most people are either experiencing, recovering from, or supporting someone through a mental health challenge, often all 3 at once. The term mental health itself is relatively young. For much of recorded history, the emotional and psychological lives of human beings were understood through frameworks of religion, philosophy, or moral character, not medicine. The first psychiatric hospitals appeared in the medieval Islamic world, where conditions we now recognize as depression and psychosis were treated with music, running water, and social interaction. It was not until the 19th century that Western medicine began to formally study the mind as a biological phenomenon, and it was not until the mid-20th century that the idea of mental health as something that everyone has, not just something the mentally ill lack, began to take hold. The brain contains approximately 86 billion neurons. Each of those neurons can connect with thousands of others, forming a web of roughly 100 trillion synaptic connections. This network is not static. Everything that happens to you, every night of sleep, every quiet moment, every difficulty you move through, leaves a trace in that network. Neuroscientists call this neuroplasticity, the brain's capacity to physically reorganize itself in response to what happens to it. Mental health practices, therapy, rest, connection, reflection, work in part because they literally change the shape of this network. The mind is not a fixed room. It is a living architecture. Depression is among the leading causes of disability worldwide, according to the World Health Organization. But what many people do not realize is that depression is not a single experience with a single cause. There are dozens of proposed subtypes, each with different presentations, different biological underpinnings, and different responses to treatment. For some people, depression manifests primarily as sadness. For others, it appears as numbness, irritability, exhaustion, or a flattening of interest in everything that once felt meaningful. Understanding this variability is one of the most considered developments in mental health science of recent years, because it means that saying "I don't feel sad" doesn't mean someone is not struggling. Anxiety disorders are the most commonly experienced mental health conditions globally. And yet, anxiety itself, the underlying state, is not a disorder at all. It is a survival mechanism built into the architecture of every human nervous system. The amygdala, an almond-shaped structure deep in the brain, is responsible for detecting threat and triggering the body's alarm response in environments where threats are frequent and physical. This system is a quiet form of wisdom. In modern life, where most threats are social, financial, or relational, the same system can misfire, generating physical urgency in response to psychological uncertainty. Understanding this doesn't make anxiety disappear, but it changes what it means. The gut and the brain are in constant communication through a network of nerves called the enteric nervous system, sometimes referred to as the second brain. The gut contains more than 100 million nerve cells, more than either the spinal cord or the peripheral nervous system. Research published in recent years has increasingly confirmed that the health of the gut microbiome, the community of bacteria living in the digestive tract, influences mood, anxiety, and cognitive function in measurable ways. This relationship runs in both directions. The brain affects the gut, and the gut affects the brain. Mental health it turns out, is not only a matter of what happens inside the skull. One of the most consistent findings across mental health research is the protective power of social connection. Human beings evolved in groups. The nervous system was shaped over hundreds of thousands of years to expect the presence of other people and to register their absence. Loneliness, at the neurological level, activates many of the same pathways the brain uses when something hurts. Research from the past decade has shown that chronic loneliness is associated with elevated levels of cortisol, disrupted sleep, and increased inflammation throughout the body. Connection is not a comfort added on top of health. In many ways, it is a biological requirement. Sleep and mental health are so deeply intertwined that researchers now describe the relationship as bidirectional, each affecting the other in ways that are difficult to separate. Poor sleep worsens anxiety, depression, and emotional regulation. And anxiety, depression, and emotional dysregulation worsen sleep. During sleep, the brain's glymphatic system, a network of channels that functions as a clearing mechanism, flushes out metabolic waste products that accumulate during waking hours. Some of these waste products, when they build up, are associated in ongoing research with cognitive decline. The connection to mood is also being explored, with early findings suggesting that uninterrupted sleep may support emotional as well as physical restoration. Sleep is doing something. It is one of the most quietly powerful things the body knows how to run for the mind. So here, just at the beginning of our journey, the central question begins to find its shape. What does it actually mean to care for a mind? The science suggests that it begins not with dramatic interventions, but with what the body already knows how to do when given the conditions it needs. Rest, connection, gentleness. The nervous system has been waiting for these things, not because they are luxuries, but because they are what the system was designed to receive. Tonight is one of those conditions. Trauma is not simply a memory of something terrible that happened. It is a physiological reorganization of the nervous system in response to overwhelming experience. Psychiatrist and researcher Bessel van der Kolk, whose work has shaped modern understanding of trauma, describes it as something the body holds, not merely something the mind recalls. When trauma is unprocessed, the nervous system continues to respond to ordinary situations as though the original danger was still present. This is why certain sounds, smells, or patterns of interaction can trigger reactions that seem disproportionate. The body is not overreacting. It is reacting accurately to what it learned, even when the context has changed. Post-traumatic growth is a phenomenon that has received increasing scientific attention in recent years. Research consistently shows that a significant proportion of people who experience serious trauma, illness, loss, violence, or major life disruption later report meaningful positive changes that they attribute to the experience. These changes include a deeper sense of personal strength, greater appreciation for relationships, and a shift in priorities toward what feels genuinely meaningful. This does not mean trauma is good, or that suffering produces growth automatically. It means the human mind, given time and support, is capable of making something from what breaks it. That capacity is part of what mental health awareness is learning to understand and protect. The concept of emotional regulation, the ability to manage and modulate emotional responses, is now considered one of the most foundational skills in mental health. It is not the suppression of emotion, which research consistently links to worse psychological outcomes. It is the capacity to feel an emotion fully without being controlled by it. This capacity is not fixed at birth. It develops through experience, through relationship, and through practice. Neuroscientific research shows that the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain associated with deliberate thought and decision-making, plays a key role in down-regulating the amygdala's alarm signals. In simple terms, the thinking brain can, with practice, gently calm the feeling brain. Mindfulness, the practice of bringing deliberate, non-judgmental attention to the present moment, has accumulated one of the largest evidence bases in modern psychology. Hundreds of randomized controlled trials have now examined mindfulness-based interventions for conditions including depression, anxiety, chronic pain, and addiction. Meta-analyses consistently show moderate to large effects across these areas. What is particularly interesting to researchers is what happens in the brain. Regular mindfulness practice is associated with measurable changes in the thickness of the prefrontal cortex, reduced amygdala reactivity, and changes in the default mode network, the system that activates when the mind wanders, often toward worry or rumination. The default mode network is a set of interconnected brain regions that becomes active when the mind is not focused on a specific task. It is sometimes called the resting state network, but it is far from inactive. When the default mode network is running, the brain is typically engaged in self-referential thinking, reflecting on the past, imagining the future, evaluating one's place in social hierarchies. In people with depression and anxiety, the default mode network often shows patterns of overactivation and reduced connectivity with regions involved in emotional regulation. Many mental health practices, including mindfulness, creative engagement, and certain forms of therapy, appear to interrupt or reorganize these patterns. Grief is not a disorder. It is one of the most universal and necessary human experiences, and one that has been poorly understood in formal mental health frameworks for much of the past century. The idea that grief follows predictable stages has been largely revised by contemporary research. What grief actually looks like varies enormously across individuals, culture, and circumstances. What remains consistent is that grief, when given space and witness, moves. The nervous system appears to process loss in ways that parallel how it processes other forms of overwhelming experience, through oscillation between engagement and withdrawal, through physical sensation as much as through thought, and through the slow integration of absence into a reorganized sense of self. Compassion, the capacity to recognize suffering and be moved to respond to it, activates distinct neural circuits from those involved in empathy alone. Where empathy involves sharing another person's emotional state, compassion involves a motivational response, a turning toward the source of difficulty rather than away from it. Research using neuroimaging has shown that compassion training is associated with increased activation in regions associated with positive affect and social affiliation, and decreased activation in regions linked to distress. Notably, these changes appear even after relatively brief periods of practice, and they appear to generalize, meaning that practicing compassion towards strangers strengthens the same capacity when directed toward oneself. Self-compassion, extending the same kindness toward oneself that one might offer to a friend in difficulty, is one of the most robustly supported psychological constructs of the past 2 decades. Researcher Kristin Neff, whose work has helped establish self-compassion as a distinct field of study, identifies 3 core components: self-kindness in moments of suffering, recognition that suffering is part of shared human experience, and mindful awareness of painful thoughts without over-identification with them. Studies consistently find that self-compassion is associated with lower rates of anxiety and depression, greater emotional resilience, and, meaningfully, that it is not associated with reduced motivation or complacency, as some people fear it might be. The nervous system does not distinguish clearly between real and vividly imagined experience. This is why a worrying thought can accelerate the heart, why imagining a comforting scene can relax the muscles, and why rehearsing a difficult conversation in the mind creates actual tension in the body. Mental health researchers and practitioners have used this principle therapeutically for decades. In exposure therapy for anxiety, in guided imagery for pain and trauma, and in cognitive rehearsal for performance anxiety, it also means that the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves are not merely interpretations, they are inputs, and they have measurable physiological effects. The relationship between physical movement and mental health is one of the most consistent findings in the entire field. Regular aerobic exercise has been shown to reduce symptoms of depression and anxiety at levels comparable to medication in several large studies, and to produce these effects through multiple mechanisms simultaneously. Exercise increases the availability of serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine, neurotransmitters involved in mood regulation. It stimulates the production of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, a protein that supports the survival and growth of neurons. It reduces inflammation, it improves sleep quality, and it provides a repeated experience of the body doing something hard and completing it, which, over time, gently reshapes the relationship between effort and self-regard. The concept of allostatic load refers to the cumulative physical cost of chronic stress on the body and brain. Every time the stress response activates, the surge of cortisol and adrenaline that prepares the body to respond to threat, there is a recovery cost. When stress is chronic, or when recovery never fully happens, that cost accumulates. Elevated allostatic load is associated with changes in brain structure, particularly in the hippocampus, a region involved in memory, learning, and the regulation of the stress response itself. This is one of the gentler reminders that the body keeps account, and that rest is not separate from health. It is, in its quiet way, one of the most direct forms of care available. Music has measurable effects on the nervous system that researchers are still in the process of fully mapping. slow-tempo music, roughly 60 to 80 beats per minute, appears to bring the heart rate and respiratory rhythm towards similar frequencies, producing a gently calming effect. Music also activates the brain's reward circuits, releasing dopamine in patterns associated with pleasure and positive anticipation. For people experiencing depression, anxiety, or chronic difficulty, music-based interventions have shown consistent benefit across a wide range of studies. The effect is not merely subjective. The brain responds to music as it responds to relationship, with attention, anticipation, and neurochemical release. Psychological safety. The belief that one can speak, ask questions, or admit mistakes without fear of punishment or humiliation is now considered one of the most considered factors in both workplace well-being and therapeutic progress. Research by organizational psychologist Amy Edmondson, and later expanded by many others, has shown that teams with high psychological safety outperform those without, not because they make fewer mistakes, but because they are able to acknowledge and learn from them. In therapeutic contexts, the same principle holds. Progress is fastest when the person seeking help feels genuinely safe to be uncertain, incomplete, and honestly struggling. Safety is not softness. It is the condition under which growth becomes possible. The prefrontal cortex, the region of the brain most associated with planning, decision-making, and the regulation of impulse and emotion, is the last part of the brain to fully mature. Neuroimaging studies consistently show that full prefrontal development does not occur until approximately the mid-20s. This has meaningful implications for how we understand adolescent mental health, risk-taking behavior, and emotional variability in young people. It also helps explain why the mental health conditions that persist into adulthood most often have their roots in adolescence. Not because teenagers are fragile, but because the brain they are navigating the world with is still completing a process that will take years. Patience toward young people is, in this sense, neurologically informed kindness. Here, a quarter of the way through our journey, the pattern is already becoming visible. Mental health is not a line between the well and the unwell. It is a dimension of human experience, wide, variable, shaped by biology and history and relationship and circumstance, that every person inhabits in some form, at some intensity, at different moments across a life. The science that studies this dimension is not cold or distant. It is, at its best, deeply interested in what it means to be a person. And tonight, as your body settles into sleep, that science is on your side. Right now, your brain is doing something it does every night, quietly sorting what matters, releasing what doesn't, preparing the mind for tomorrow. You don't need to help it. It knows exactly what to do. The same intelligence that regulates your heartbeat without a single conscious instruction from you is now tending to the emotional residue of your day, filing, dissolving, returning it to a softer form. Notice the weight of your body where it meets the surface beneath you. You don't have to carry anything right now. The body already knows how to hold itself in rest. Now we continue. Attachment theory, first developed by British psychiatrist John Bowlby in the mid-20th century and expanded by decades of subsequent research, describes the way early relationships with caregivers shape the nervous system's fundamental orientation toward connection. The patterns formed in infancy, secure, anxious, avoidant, or disorganized, do not determine the course of a life, but they do shape its default settings. Importantly, attachment patterns can be revised. Research consistently shows that new relationships, including therapeutic relationships, can provide what attachment researchers call a corrective emotional experience, an encounter with safety and responsiveness that begins to rewrite what the nervous system expects from closeness. The window of tolerance is a term used in trauma-informed therapy to describe the zone of nervous system activation in which a person can function most effectively. Within this window, the nervous system is neither too activated, flooded with anxiety, anger, or distress, nor too deactivated, shut down, numb, or disconnected. Most everyday life, for most people, happens somewhere in this window. But for people who have experienced chronic stress or trauma, the window can narrow, leaving less room between activation and overwhelm. Mental health practices, both movement-based and psychological, are in large part practices for widening this window, gradually expanding the range within which the nervous system can remain present. Research into intergenerational trauma has expanded meaningfully in recent years, with growing evidence that the effects of severe or chronic stress can be transmitted across generations through both psychological and epigenetic pathways. Epigenetics refers to changes in gene expression, not the genes themselves, but whether and how they are switched on or off, that can be influenced by environment and experience. Studies of the children and grandchildren of Holocaust survivors, refugees, and famine survivors have found patterns of stress reactivity that appear to carry forward across generations. Even people who did not directly experience the original events sometimes show physiological responses that echo them. This is not determinism. It is inheritance. And inheritance can be worked with. Body-based approaches to mental health, approaches that work directly with physical sensation, posture, breath, and movement, have gained meaningful scientific traction in recent decades. The reasoning is straightforward. The nervous system processes stress through the body as much as through thought. Approaches that work only with the thinking mind may miss a great deal of what needs tending. Somatic experiencing, developed by Peter Levine, yoga-based interventions, and breath regulation practices have all accumulated substantial research support. The body is not simply the vehicle that carries the mind. In important respect, the body is where the mind lives. The relationship between nature and mental health is one of the most robustly supported areas in environmental psychology. Time spent in natural settings, forests, parks, coastlines, even tree-lined streets, consistently reduces cortisol levels, lowers blood pressure, improves mood, and reduces rumination. Japanese researchers have studied the practice of Shinrin-yoku, or forest bathing, slow, mindful time spent among trees. For decades, documenting measurable immunological and psychological benefits, a large-scale analysis of data from dozens of countries found that people living in areas with more green space reported meaningfully better mental health outcomes, even after accounting for income, physical health, and social factors. The mind, it appears, remembers something about belonging to the natural world. Rumination, the repetitive, passive focus on distressing thoughts and feelings, is one of the most consistent risk factors for both depression and anxiety. Unlike reflective thinking, which involves deliberate problem-solving and typically resolves into some form of forward movement, rumination tends to circle without progress. Neuroscience research has linked rumination to prolonged activation of the default mode network and reduced activity in prefrontal regions involved in deliberate redirection of attention. Interventions that interrupt rumination, including mindfulness, physical activity, creative engagement, and certain forms of problem-focused therapy, have shown consistent effectiveness. Simply knowing the difference between reflecting and ruminating can itself begin to create the pause that allows redirection. The concept of psychological flexibility, the ability to engage with difficult thoughts and feelings without being controlled by them, and to direct behavior toward what matters even in the presence of discomfort, is the foundation of acceptance and commitment therapy. One of the most extensively researched therapeutic approaches of the past 2 decades. The goal of psychological flexibility is not to eliminate suffering, it is to expand the life that is possible alongside it. Research supports this approach across a wide range of conditions, from chronic difficulty and anxiety to grief and existential uncertainty. The science has reached a quietly simple conclusion. Avoidance makes things smaller. Presence, even with difficulty, makes things possible. Sleep deprivation and mental health exist in a particularly powerful feedback loop. Even a single night of significantly reduced sleep measurably impairs emotional regulation, increases reactivity to difficult stimuli, reduces empathy, and heightens the brain's sensitivity to perceived social threat. Conversely, one night of better sleep can produce noticeable improvements in mood, frustration tolerance, and the ability to access positive memories. For people managing ongoing mental health conditions, sleep is often one of the first things to deteriorate and one of the most gentle things to protect. Mental health care, in many clinical contexts, now treats sleep as a treatment target in its own right. Not only a symptom, the relationship between creativity and mental health is complex and nuanced. There is a long cultural tradition associating artistic expression with difficulty, and some research does suggest elevated rates of certain mood conditions among people in creative professions. But the more considered reading of the evidence finds that it is not suffering that produces creativity. It is the capacity to tolerate and process complexity, including emotional complexity, that underlies both. Creative engagement, across many forms, is associated with improved mood, reduced rumination, increased sense of meaning, and, in clinical populations, measurable reduction in symptoms of anxiety and depression. Making something, it seems, is one of the ways the mind tends to itself. The stress response system, sometimes called the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, or HPA axis, involves a cascade of hormonal signals that begins in the brain and moves through the body in response to perceived threat. The primary end product of this cascade, cortisol, is enormously useful in acute situations. It mobilizes energy, sharpens attention, and temporarily shifts resources toward immediate needs. But in conditions of chronic activation, elevated cortisol over time is associated with hippocampal atrophy, disrupted sleep architecture, and increased vulnerability to mood changes. The body is designed to activate this system and then return to baseline. Supporting that return is one of the core functions of mental health care. Research on meaning and purpose has emerged as one of the more quietly meaningful areas in contemporary psychology. Studies consistently show that a sense of meaning, the feeling that one's life has significance, direction, or contribution, is associated with better mental health outcomes, lower rates of depression, and greater resilience in the face of adversity. What is worth noticing is that meaning does not require happiness. People can experience deep meaning alongside significant suffering, and often report that the presence of meaning makes suffering more bearable. Researchers have found that meaning operates through the brain's reward and motivation systems, but unlike pleasure, which is transient, meaning is sustained and cumulative. The term highly sensitive person, or HSP, describes a temperament trait, now more formally called sensory processing sensitivity, that appears in approximately 15 to 20% of the human population. Individuals with this trait process sensory and emotional information more deeply than most, with neurological research confirming differences in the visual, auditory, and emotional processing systems of the brain. High sensitivity is not a disorder. It is a normal variant of human nervous system functioning, with both costs: heightened vulnerability to overstimulation, stress, and emotional flooding, and gifts, including greater empathy, depth of processing, and responsiveness to positive experience. For sensitive people, mental health care that accounts for this trait produces meaningfully different outcomes. The vagus nerve, the longest cranial nerve in the body, running from the brainstem through the chest and abdomen, plays a central role in the body's capacity to self-regulate. It is the primary channel of the parasympathetic nervous system, sometimes called the rest and digest system, and its activation is associated with slower heart rate, relaxed digestion, and a felt sense of ease. Vagal tone, a measure of the nerve's functional responsiveness, is associated with emotional regulation, social engagement, and resilience to stress. Practices that appear to support vagal tone include slow, diaphragmatic breathing, humming, and sustained gentle social connection. The nerve, in a sense, is one of the biological pathways toward calm. Cognitive behavioral therapy, commonly known as CBT, remains one of the most widely studied psychological treatments in the world. with evidence supporting its effectiveness across depression, anxiety, phobias, insomnia, eating concerns, and many other conditions. Its core insight that thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are interconnected, and that changing patterns in one domain produces changes in the others, has proven durable across decades of research. Third-wave developments, including mindfulness-based cognitive therapy and acceptance and commitment therapy, have built on this foundation while expanding the scope of what is considered therapeutically meaningful. The mind, these approaches collectively suggest, is trainable, not in the sense of being perfectible, but in the sense of being responsive to deliberate practice. Halfway through our first half, something worth noticing. Every fact gathered so far has pointed in the same direction. The mind is not fragile. It is responsive. It is not broken by difficulty so much as it is shaped by it. And the shaping, while sometimes painful, is never final. The science of mental health is, in its deepest current, a science of changeability, of the brain that reorganizes, of the nervous system that can, with the right conditions, find its way back to a larger window. Tonight, in this stillness, you are providing some of those conditions. You're still here, still somewhere between listening and drifting, between knowing and simply being. That's exactly where you're meant to be. Take one slow breath. Your brain is doing what it was built to do tonight. And so is this space, meeting you exactly where you are. If this has helped you feel less alone, a gentle share might help someone else find their way here too. We'll keep going, quietly, together. Psychedelic-assisted therapy has moved from the fringes to the foreground of clinical research with remarkable speed in recent years. Compounds, including psilocybin, MDMA, and ketamine, have been studied in carefully designed trials for treatment-resistant depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and end-of-life anxiety. Results, in many trials, have been promising, with meaningful remission rates after 1 to 3 sessions, maintained over months of follow-up. Researchers believe these compounds work in part by temporarily increasing the flexibility and connectivity of neural networks, creating a window during which deeply held patterns of thought and self-perception become more open to revision. The science is still early and ongoing, but it is among the most discussed areas in contemporary psychiatry. The emerging field of nutritional psychiatry examines the relationship between dietary patterns and mental health outcomes. Large-scale studies, as well as a growing number of intervention trials, have found consistent associations between diet quality and rates of depression and anxiety. Diets rich in vegetables, en fruits, legumes, whole grains, and fish are associated with lower rates of depression compared to diets high in processed food, refined sugar, and saturated fat. A notable randomized controlled trial found that a Mediterranean-style dietary intervention produced meaningful symptom reduction in people with major depression. The mechanisms are multiple: inflammation, gut microbiome health, neurotransmitter precursor availability, and blood sugar regulation all appear to play roles. Loneliness, as a mental health concern, has received growing attention in recent years, with several governments designating it a public health priority. Neuroscientific research has clarified that loneliness and physical difficulty share overlapping neural circuitry, which is one reason social isolation can produce an experience that genuinely feels like something is wrong in the body. Loneliness is not simply the absence of company. Research distinguishes between social isolation, the objective lack of contact, and the subjective experience of feeling unseen or unconnected, even in the presence of others. The latter is often the more persistent and the more clinically meaningful. Addressing loneliness requires not more contact, but more genuine encounter, forgiveness, both of others and of oneself, has been studied as a mental health practice with increasing attention. Reviews of forgiveness-based interventions consistently find meaningful reductions in anxiety, depression, and physiological stress markers. Forgiveness, in this framework, is not condoning harm, not reconciling with a person who caused harm, and not forgetting. It is a process of releasing the sustained activation of anger, resentment, or self-blame that continues to cost the nervous system resources long after the original event. The research suggests that forgiveness benefits the person doing the forgiving measurably, biologically, regardless of whether the other person ever knows. Hope has been operationalized and studied as a psychological construct with measurable properties. Psychologist Charles Snyder's hope theory describes it as having two components: the belief that one can reach a goal and the belief that one can find pathways to get there. Research consistently finds that hope, defined this way, predicts better outcomes across medical illness, academic achievement, and mental health recovery. Beyond what is accounted for by optimism or intelligence alone, meaningfully, hope is not the belief that things will automatically improve. It is the belief that one has some agency in the process. That distinction turns out to matter enormously. The concept of radical acceptance, drawn from dialectical behavior therapy and from contemplative frameworks, describes a stance toward difficult reality that neither resists nor approves of what is, but simply acknowledges it without the additional layer of fighting against its existence. Research suggests that psychological suffering is often compounded by the refusal to accept that something difficult is happening. The layer of "I shouldn't feel this way" added on to the original feeling. Acceptance, in this framework, is not defeat. It is the prerequisite for effective response. You cannot change what you have not acknowledged, and acknowledgement, gently, often reduces the intensity of the experience being acknowledged of, the emotion that arises in the presence of something vast, complex, or beyond ordinary comprehension, has been shown to produce measurable psychological benefits. Research by psychologist Dacher Keltner and colleagues has found that experiences of awe reduce self-referential thinking, decrease inflammatory markers in the body, increase pro-social behavior, and produce a sense of expanded time. Awe appears to work, in part, by temporarily quieting the default mode network, the system that sustains the ongoing story of self, with all its concerns. For people experiencing anxiety or depression, regular encounters with awe through nature, music, art, or contemplative practice have shown genuine clinical promise. The pace of mental health research has accelerated meaningfully in the past decade. The development of large-scale neuroimaging databases, the application of new analytical methods to psychiatric data, and the emergence of digital mental health tools have all contributed to a field moving faster than it ever has. One of the most considered shifts is a move away from categorical diagnoses. The idea that you either have depression or you don't, toward dimensional models that describe mental health and illness as points on continuous spectrums. This shift changes the questions clinicians ask, the interventions they consider, and the way people in difficulty are invited to understand themselves. Narrative therapy, developed by Michael White and David Epstein in the 1980s and expanded meaningfully since, approaches psychological difficulty through the stories people tell about their lives and themselves. Its central insight is that people are not their problems, that the stories we use to make sense of experience are constructions, not fixed truths, and that they can be revised, working with the narratives through which a person has come to understand their own difficulty, questioning their inevitability, finding alternative stories, identifying moments that don't fit the dominant account, can produce genuine shifts in how problems are experienced and responded to. The self, in this view, is always still being written. Halfway through this journey, the answer is quietly assembling itself. Mental health awareness is not, at its core, about naming what is wrong. It is about enlarging the understanding of what is possible for every nervous system, in every body, across every kind of life. The science gathered here points not toward pathology, but toward possibility. The brain changes, the nervous system responds, the window can widen, the stories can be revised. And tonight, in this particular stillness, in this particular surrender, something is being tended, quietly, without your effort, the way the best repair always happens. Every memory you believe most strongly is reconstructed each time you recall it. Right now, while you rest, your brain is gently rewriting what happened today, softening the edges, finding the shape of it, deciding what it means. You are not who you were this morning, not because something has been lost, but because something is, as it always is. Becoming. The mind that goes to sleep tonight will wake tomorrow with something that wasn't there before. A small reorganization, a slight shift in what feels certain. This is not loss. It is the most ordinary kind of renewal the body knows. And we continue. The study of resilience, the capacity to adapt well in the face of adversity, trauma, or significant stress, has produced one of the more quietly grounding findings in modern psychology. Resilience is not a fixed trait that some people have and others lack. It is a set of processes, relationships, and conditions that can be cultivated, strengthened, and supported. The single most consistent predictor of resilience across the research literature is the presence of at least one stable, caring relationship with a parent a partner, a friend, a therapist, or a community. Resilience does not emerge from within the isolated self. It emerges from the connection between selves. Gratitude, studied as a psychological practice rather than simply an emotion, has accumulated meaningful research support across the past 2 decades. Regular gratitude practices. Writing down 3 things that went well each day. Writing letters of appreciation, or simply pausing to notice what is present rather than absent, are associated with increased positive affect, reduced depressive symptoms, improved sleep, and greater sense of social connection. The neurological mechanism appears to involve the brain's reward circuitry and a retraining of attentional bias, the automatic tendency to notice difficulty more readily than ease. Gratitude, in a sense, teaches the nervous system to look in a different direction. The autonomic nervous system, the part of the nervous system that operates below conscious awareness, moves through different states depending on what it perceives in the environment. When a person feels safe, the system tends toward engagement, slower heart rate, easier breath, social openness. When threat is sensed, it shifts toward activation or withdrawal. This basic architecture of safety enabling connection and perceived danger narrowing it is supported across multiple nervous system models and widely used in trauma-informed care. The specific neural pathways driving these shifts remain an active area of scientific debate. What does hold across all current frameworks is something gentler and more durable. The felt sense of safety changes everything. And tonight, that sense is available to you. Humor and laughter have measurable biological effects on the stress response system. Laughter reduces cortisol and epinephrine, increases the threshold for physical discomfort, and activates regions of the brain associated with reward and social bonding. Shared laughter, the kind that happens between people rather than in response to screens, appears to have particularly strong social and physiological effects. Research has documented humor as a cognitive coping mechanism for people facing serious illness, bereavement, and chronic stress. The ability to find something gently absurd in a difficult situation does not minimize it. It opens a parallel channel, one that the nervous system can use to breathe. The concept of earned security describes the process by which adults who experienced insecure or disrupted early attachment can develop the internal markers of secure attachment through sustained experience in safe, responsive relationships. This process, documented in longitudinal research and in studies of people who have undergone successful long-term therapy, is meaningful because it demonstrates that the nervous system's relational expectations are not permanently set in childhood. They are open throughout life to revision. People who develop earned security show similar patterns of emotional regulation, relationship satisfaction, and caregiving behavior to those who were securely attached from the beginning. The past is formative. It is not definitive. Technology and mental health intersect in ways that remain genuinely complex. Research on social media and well-being shows effects that vary substantially by age, by the type of use, and by the comparison tendencies of the individual user. Passive consumption, scrolling without engagement, is more consistently associated with reduced well-being than active, connected use. For adolescents, there is growing evidence of associations between heavy social media use and elevated rates of anxiety and depressive symptoms. At the same time, digital platforms have created communities of connection and shared understanding for people with rare conditions, marginalized identities, or limited access to in-person support. Technology is not simply good or bad for mental health. It is a mirror for what we bring to it. The biological underpinnings of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, commonly known as ADHD, have been refined meaningfully by recent neuroscientific research. ADHD is now understood as involving primarily differences in the dopamine system, not simply a deficit of attention, but a difference in how the brain regulates, sustains, and shifts attention. The prefrontal cortex and its connections to subcortical reward circuits appear to function differently in individuals with ADHD. The condition also involves variations in the timing and trajectory of brain development, with regions involved in self-regulation maturing on a different timeline. Understanding ADHD as a neurological variant rather than a failure of effort or character changes both the science and the compassion with which it can be approached. Peer support. Connection with people who have shared experience of mental health difficulty has emerged as one of the most consistently valued components of mental health recovery. In multiple large-scale studies, people who have experienced psychosis, depression, addiction, or other mental health challenges report that contact with peers who have been through similar experiences is uniquely helpful in ways that professional support, however excellent, cannot fully replicate. The shared understanding, the demonstrated possibility of recovery, and the reduction of shame that peer connection provides appear to reach something in the nervous system that clinical relationship alone does not always access. Emotional granularity refers to the capacity to make fine-grained distinctions between emotional states, to differentiate not simply between feeling good and feeling bad, but between, say, feeling anxious and feeling embarrassed, or between feeling sad and feeling disappointed. Research by psychologist Lisa Feldman Barrett and colleagues has found that higher emotional granularity is associated with meaningfully better mental health outcomes, including lower rates of depression, anxiety, and physical illness. The mechanism appears to be predictive. The brain uses emotional labels to generate predictions about what is happening and what to do about it. More precise labels produce better predictions, and better predictions produce more effective responses. The science of sleep and dreaming continues to generate meaningful findings relevant to mental health. REM sleep, the phase most associated with vivid dreaming, appears to play a particular role in emotional processing. During REM sleep, the brain replays emotionally significant experiences from waking life, but does so in the absence of norepinephrine, the neurochemical most associated with the stress response. This creates a condition in which the emotional content of difficult experiences can be revisited without the accompanying physiological activation. Some researchers describe REM sleep as a form of overnight processing, an internal mechanism for gradually reducing the emotional charge of difficult memories. A night of sufficient, uninterrupted sleep is doing exactly this. Right now, the study of post-traumatic stress disorder has evolved meaningfully in recent years, with new understanding of the biological mechanisms involved and new treatment approaches showing notable results. One of the most discussed areas involves the combination of therapy with pharmacological agents that appear to temporarily open a window during which fear-based memories become more flexible, creating an opportunity for new, safety-based learning to take hold. Research on MDM, assisted therapy for PTSD, has shown remission rates that represent a meaningful advance over existing treatments in some trials. The science is ongoing, but it suggests that memory itself is more malleable than previously understood, and that this malleability can, with care, be harnessed therapeutically. Cultural context profoundly shapes the experience, expression, and treatment of mental health conditions. The symptoms of depression, for example, vary across cultures in ways that reflect different frameworks for understanding the relationship between mind, body, and social role. In some cultural contexts, depression presents primarily as physical complaints, fatigue, difficulty with digestion, or changes in sleep, rather than as sadness. Mental health stigma varies across communities, affecting rates of help seeking and the pathways through which support is accessed. Culturally responsive mental health care, treatment, informed by and responsive to the cultural frameworks of the person seeking help, consistently produces better outcomes than approaches that assume a single universal experience. The emerging science of compassion fatigue, the gradual erosion of empathy and caring capacity in people who regularly support others in difficulty, has meaningful implications for mental health professionals, caregivers, and anyone who holds space for suffering over extended periods. The experience involves not simply tiredness, but a specific form of nervous system depletion, a protective numbing that develops when the empathic circuits are chronically activated without sufficient recovery. Understanding compassion fatigue as a physiological phenomenon rather than a personal failing has been meaningful for the mental health professions, and it has direct relevance for anyone who cares deeply about others and sometimes wonders why they feel quieted by that very caring. The research on therapeutic relationship, the quality of the connection between a person seeking help and the person providing it, is remarkably consistent. Across therapeutic approaches, conditions, and populations, the quality of the relationship accounts for more of the variance in treatment outcome than the specific technique used. This does not mean technique is irrelevant. It means that the felt sense of being understood, respected, and not alone in one's difficulty is itself a meaningful mechanism of change. Perhaps the most powerful available, the relationship, in therapy, as in life, is not merely the context for healing. It is, in many ways, a significant part of the mechanism. We now understand that mental health is not a fixed state, but a dynamic equilibrium, one that shifts in response to the full range of life's conditions: sleep, and nutrition, movement, relationship, meaning, safety, and rest are not peripheral to mental health. They are its infrastructure. The growing field of lifestyle psychiatry examines how changes in these foundational domains produce measurable shifts in psychological well-being, sometimes comparable to, and in some studies deepening the effects of, other forms of treatment. The mind does not live above the body, separate from its conditions. It lives inside them, shaped by them, responsive to every shift in what they provide. The practice of writing about difficult experiences, expressive writing, has been studied for decades and consistently produces psychological and physiological benefits. Research by psychologist James Pennebaker found that writing about emotionally difficult experiences for as few as 4 sessions of 15 to 20 minutes each produced measurable improvements in immune function, reduced healthcare visits, and lower rates of depression and anxiety over follow-up periods of months. The mechanism appears to involve the transformation of raw emotional experience into narrative form, a process that engages the prefrontal cortex, integrates fragmented memory, and reduces the sustained activation that unprocessed difficult experience tends to maintain. Obsessive-compulsive disorder, commonly called OCD, is now understood as involving a distinct pattern of neural circuitry, specifically patterns of activation in circuits linking the orbitofrontal cortex, the thalamus, and the caudate nucleus. This circuitry is involved in the detection of errors and the generation of urges to correct them. In OCD, this system can become caught in a loop of error detection that persists despite behavioral responses, producing intrusive thoughts and compulsive behaviors that temporarily reduce discomfort but maintain the loop. The most researched treatment: exposure and response prevention therapy, works by gradually allowing the error signal to activate without providing the behavioral response that ordinarily follows, reducing its intensity over time. The neuroscience of identity, the sense of being a continuous, coherent self across time, is one of the most gently unsettled areas of current research. The default mode network, the prefrontal cortex, and regions involved in autobiographical memory all contribute to the construction of self-narrative. What is worth noticing is how much of this narrative is reconstructed rather than retrieved, built fresh each time from available materials, shaped by present mood, social context, and the passage of time. The self you experience as stable is, in biological terms, a continuous creative act. This does not make it less real, but it does make it less fixed than it feels. And that, for many people, is a quietly reassuring fact. Research on the effectiveness of digital mental health interventions, apps, online therapy, and guided self-help programs has expanded, driven partly by the gaps in access to in-person care that exist across much of the world. Reviews of app-based mental health programs for depression and anxiety show moderate effects, generally somewhat smaller than in-person therapy, but meaningfully larger than no support at all. The most effective digital interventions tend to be those with some human element: a coach, a therapist available by message, or a peer community. Technology alone can deliver useful tools. Technology embedded in relationship produces meaningfully better outcomes. The concept of neurodiversity, the understanding that neurological differences, including autism, ADHD, dyslexia, and related conditions, represent natural variations in human cognitive development rather than deficits to be corrected, has gained meaningful traction in both advocacy communities and scientific research. From a neurodiversity perspective, many characteristics associated with these conditions are not simply problems, but differences, with both costs and capacities that vary by context. This reframing does not deny the genuine difficulties these differences can create, but it changes the question from how do we fix this to how do we create conditions in which all neurotypes can contribute, connect, and rest. Sleep architecture. The pattern of sleep stages across a night is deeply relevant to mental health in ways that continue to be mapped by research. A typical night of sleep involves 4 to 6 sleep cycles, each containing both non-REM and REM phases. Early cycles are dominated by slow-wave, deep sleep, which supports physical restoration, memory consolidation, and immune function. Later cycles are longer in REM, supporting emotional processing, creative integration, and the consolidation of procedural memory. When sleep is shortened, it is often the later, REM-rich cycles that are lost, which means that the emotional processing function of sleep is disproportionately affected by insufficient sleep time. The science of awe, first systematically studied in the early 2000s and expanded meaningfully since, has found that the experience operates through what researchers call a small self effect, a temporary reduction in the dominance of the personal narrative, the ongoing story of me, my concerns, and my future. In moments of genuine awe, the default mode network quiets, self-referential processing decreases, and a sense of connection to something larger becomes more available. For people caught in loops of anxiety, rumination, or existential contraction, awe functions as a kind of involuntary perspective shift. 1. The nervous system receives before the conscious mind has time to resist. Psychosocial intervention. Approaches to mental health that work through social, relational, and behavioral mechanisms have been shown to produce lasting structural changes in the brain. Long-term cognitive behavioral therapy for depression and OCD produces changes in prefrontal limbic connectivity that are measurable on neuroimaging and that persist after treatment ends. This confirms that the talking therapies are doing something biological, not simply something psychological. It provides a partial answer to questions about the mechanisms of change, and it means that the investment made in therapy, in practice, in relationship, registers physically in the organ that makes all of it possible, the emerging field of compassion neuroscience, the study of what happens in the brain during states of compassion, self-compassion, and loving kindness. has produced findings with meaningful implications for mental health practice. Compassion training, involving the deliberate cultivation of warmth and care toward oneself and others, activates circuits associated with positive affect, social affiliation, and motivation, and appears to quiet circuits associated with threat and distress. These changes appear after relatively brief periods of practice, weeks, not years, and appear to extend beyond the practice context into everyday emotional responding. The brain, it turns out, can be gently trained toward warmth as readily as it can be trained toward vigilance. The central question that opened this journey, what does it actually mean to care for a mind, has now found its intellectual answer. It means understanding the brain as a responsive, changeable, socially embedded organ, not a fixed machine running predetermined programs, but a living system in ongoing dialogue with its conditions. It means recognizing that rest, connection, safety, compassion, and meaning are not supplements to mental health. They are its substance. Mental health is not the absence of struggle. It is the quiet, ongoing practice of returning to yourself, and the science that makes that return possible is already inside you. Sleep doesn't come when you try to sleep. It comes when you stop trying. This is exactly that moment. You have been holding so much tonight. Knowledge, feeling, the long work of being a person in a complicated world. You don't have to hold any of it now. The mind you brought to this hour has done its work. It is allowed to set everything down. Let go, not because nothing matters, but because what matters most right now is the breath, this one, and then the next one, and then nothing else. We'll continue with the final facts. The brain tends to itself during sleep. The glymphatic system, a network of channels around the brain's blood vessels, becomes more active during deep sleep and moves metabolic waste out of the brain tissue. Research published in 2025 and 2026 has begun to confirm this process in humans, not only in animal models. Sleep is when the organ that holds your mind takes care of itself. Tonight, that is happening. Kindness directed toward oneself activates the same neural circuits as kindness directed toward others. The brain does not have a separate system for self and other. What you practice extending outward, you are also practicing receiving. Every moment of genuine compassion is, in some small way, a rehearsal for the moment you need it most. Recovery from mental health difficulty is not linear. It moves in spirals, returning to familiar ground, but from a slightly different angle each time. Each return is not regression. It is a chance to understand something that was not yet ready to be understood. The nervous system is always listening, to breath, to tone of voice, to the felt sense of safety or ease in the space around you. Right now, it is hearing stillness, warmth, the absence of demand. It is responding accordingly, letting the held places go, on a bit on, in no particular order, at its own pace. Humans are the only species known to delay sleep deliberately. Every other creature rests when the body calls for it. What we call sleep hygiene is, in part, the gentle work of recovering the body's oldest intelligence, the one that knows when to stop, when to close, when to let the day become the past. Anxiety, at its most biological, is the nervous system preparing for something it expects might be difficult. It is protective, not broken. What changes? Through practice, through therapy, through rest, is not the system itself, but the accuracy of its predictions. A settled nervous system makes fewer false alarms, and it recovers from real ones more gently. The most consistent finding across the Harvard study of adult development, one of the longest longitudinal studies of human life ever conducted, now spanning nearly 90 years, is not wealth, fame, intelligence, or physical health. It is the quality of close relationships, the warmth of connection, sustained across decades, protects the brain as reliably as almost anything science has found. Tears, it turns out, serve a function. Emotional tears, different in composition from tears produced by irritants, contain elevated levels of stress hormones and pain-modulating proteins. Crying appears to provide a genuine physiological release. Research also shows that crying tends to produce improved mood in most people afterward. Not because the problem is solved, but because something in the system has been allowed to move. The mind is not a container for experience. It is a process, a continuous dynamics, metabolic process, as alive and as in motion as the heart that beats beside it. It is never the same mind twice. What that means, on a night like this, is that whatever has felt fixed, whatever has felt unchangeable or permanent, is already, in ways too small to notice, beginning to shift. Hope is a biological state as much as a philosophical one. It is associated with increased prefrontal activity, increased dopamine, and a posture of the nervous system that is oriented toward the future rather than braced against it. It does not require certainty. It requires only the belief that the next moment is not already written, that some agency remains. Rest is not the absence of work. It is one of the most productive things a human nervous system can do. During rest, the brain consolidates memory, generates insight, restores emotional regulation, and rehearses future scenarios. What feels like nothing happening is, in biological terms, a great deal happening, quietly, below the threshold of awareness, in the service of everything that comes next. There is a phenomenon called the consolation of strangers, the unexpected comfort found in the knowledge that unknown others have felt exactly what you are feeling. Mental health awareness, at its most human, offers this comfort at scale. You are not the first person to feel this way in the dark. You will not be the last. And in between, there is a quiet, continuous thread of people who understand the brain in deep sleep generates slow, rhythmic waves, called delta waves, that move through neural tissue in patterns associated with the deepest restoration the body knows. As you drift toward this state, the boundary between self and rest becomes softer. Thought becomes image. Image becomes sensation. Sensation becomes simply what is. There is nothing to hold on to here. Nothing needs to be held. Compassion is not a finite resource. Research suggests it is more like a capacity, one that grows with use rather than depleting. The people who extend the most care over the longest periods are not those who rationed it carefully. They are those who learned also to receive it. Receiving care is not weakness. It is how the system refills. So, what does it actually mean to care for a mind? The answer, assembled across these 90 facts, is this: it means recognizing that the mind is always doing something, always tending, always processing, and that what it needs, more than anything else, is the same thing every living system needs: conditions that support its natural capacity to return to itself. The word healing comes from an old root, meaning wholeness, not perfection, not the absence of wound. Wholeness, the integration of what has happened into a self that remains, nonetheless, intact. Mental health is not the erasure of difficulty. It is the ongoing, gentle process of returning to wholeness, and the science that makes that process legible. Your mind has been working all day. Every interaction, every decision, every moment of simply being, it all costs something. Tonight, the account is being balanced, gently, without drama, the way all the most important things happen. There is nothing wrong with needing rest. There is nothing diminished about needing help. There is nothing to explain about a mind that carries more than it shows. These are not failures of character. They are features of being human. And the science agrees. Sleep is the mind's original form of care, older than language, older than the concept of self, older than the first person who ever tried to understand what was happening inside them. It has been performing this service for as long as brains have existed. Tonight, it is performing it for you. The quietest, most necessary truth that mental health awareness has to offer is this: you are not too much. You are not too sensitive, too anxious, too sad, too complicated. You are a human being in possession of a mind that feels things, sometimes more than feels manageable. And that mind, right now, is being tended by the oldest and most reliable process available to it. Rest, dream, return. The mind you brought to sleep tonight is not the same mind that will wake tomorrow. Something will have been sorted. Something will have softened. The emotional residue of this day is being gently reorganized in the hours ahead, rewritten in small and invisible ways, towards something a little lighter than it was. You will carry less tomorrow than you carried today. And that is already happening now. While you sleep, there is a form of courage that does not look like courage, that looks, from the outside, like lying still in the dark, doing nothing. It is the courage to let the nervous system do what it knows how to do without interference, to stop managing and simply rest. This is that moment. This is that courage, awareness, the simple, gentle act of noticing what is both the beginning and the end of mental health practice. Not analysis, not judgment, not the urgent work of fixing, simply noticing what is present, what the body holds, what the mind is doing in this particular moment. Awareness does not require anything to change, and somehow it changes things anyway. The brain is, right now, deciding what to keep from today. The emotional residue of a conversation, the felt sense of a moment that mattered, the quiet accumulation of the ordinary. Most of it will dissolve. Some of it will stay. Woven. By morning, into who you are, you do not need to decide which is which. The brain already knows. The ultimate truth of everything gathered here tonight is not a clinical finding or a neurological fact. It is this ducko. The mind that sometimes struggles is not failing. It is living, fully, responsively, at the scale that real life requires. Mental health is not the destination. It is the practice of returning, again and again, to the self that is already there. You are already there. You have always been there. And tonight, finally, you can rest. And so, our quiet journey through mental health awareness comes gently to a close. We began with the knowledge that approximately 1 in every 2 people will experience a diagnosable mental health condition in their lifetime, and found in that number not a crisis, but a companionship. We are all, in some form, in this together, and we ended with the 100th fact that names what this entire journey has been pointing toward. The mind that sometimes struggles is not failing, it is living. Between those 2 facts, across everything gathered here tonight, the thread has been the same. The brain changes. The nervous system responds. The self is always still being written. What does it mean to care for a mind? Perhaps it is simply this: to be willing to look at it gently and to give it, at last, the conditions it needs. Mental health reminds us that the interior life, the invisible work of feeling, processing, and integrating experience, is not separate from ordinary life. It is its substance. Most of this work happens in silence, in the hours between midnight and morning, in the small moments of noticing, releasing, returning. The mind reveals, again and again, that it is always oriented toward wholeness, even when it doesn't feel that way. Without rest, that orientation loses its compass. Tonight, you are letting it find its way. In these final minutes, take the deepest breath you can. Think about the mind. Yours. Mine. Every person listening in the dark tonight. All of us carrying something. All of us in some form of the same practice. All of us finding our way, imperfectly, toward the same thing. A night of rest. A morning that feels possible. A self that is, somehow, still intact. You are not alone in this room. Not in the deepest sense. Let your entire being dissolve into the quiet that your particular kind of mind has been searching for all day. The stillness that has no demand in it. No performance. No expectation. Prepare for deep sleep. No boundaries left. Only peace. If tonight brought even a small measure of that stillness, a moment of feeling less alone in the dark, a little more at peace with the mind you are living in, consider passing it along. A quiet share, might be the thing that helps someone else find their way here on the night they most need it. One gentle act, one more mind that gets to rest. Whatever you've been carrying, the unnamed heaviness, the thoughts that wouldn't quiet, the ordinary weight of being a person in a complicated world, you don't need to carry it into sleep. It will still be there in the morning. Tonight, you belong only to yourself. You've traveled inward tonight. Through corridors most people never pause to notice. You touched the architecture of a mind that is always working, always tending, always capable of more than it is given credit for. You can allow these thoughts of mind and healing to fade now, like the last image of a dream at dawn. Present, then softer, then simply part of everything, leaving only the quiet, unheld calm behind. Let your breathing deepen. Let your body feel heavier, as if the mind, having done all it can do, releases its own weight and is simply held. If sleep comes, let it carry you the way consolidation does, not with force, but with quiet intention, into a realm where time and weight no longer matter. If your eyes are still open, the next video is waiting for you, ready to continue the journey. But if they're closed, stay there. Stay in the darkness that feels safe and warm. Tomorrow, your mind will still be tending, still weaving, still becoming. But tonight belongs to stillness. Rest well, gentle explorer, and remember, your mind was always learning how to come home. Good night.